or in terms of roads. This is even more important in the rail freight sector, since 50% of freight trains in Europe are cross-border and are for longer distances. This is why we will propose a revision of the Train Drivers Directive to ensure that the train drivers can easily move between member states and rail companies while also benefiting from the last technological innovation. And yes, indeed, the language which does not exist a common language right now in the rail sector. So the cross-border operations require train drivers to be able to communicate with dispatchers in different languages, and this is a huge obstacle, and the Commission is assessing now possible alternatives to the current requirements in our impact assessment. We'll also revise the technical specification for interoperability. These are vital to provide a common, legally binding European basis for rail, with the possibility to use the same type of trains anywhere. Not only do the specifications ensure interoperability, they should also reduce costs, as harmonized products can be developed once and deployed across the EU and beyond, since the technical specifications for interoperability are becoming the reference regulatory framework for many other countries. The action plan also announces pilot services in which interested stakeholders can propose to the Commission their plans for cross-border long-distance passenger services and indicate where they see obstacles the Commission can help with. We do this work taking into account all passengers, including those with reduced mobility and disability, ensuring accessibility. We have received an encouraging number of interesting proposals, and they are currently being evaluated. In January, we'll present the results of the evaluation and discuss the next steps with the proposers. And with that, I would like to thank you again for your work on this own initiative report, and I'm looking forward for its adoption in the plenary. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Grazie, Commissaria. La discussione è chiusa.
Thank you, Commissioner. That concludes the debate. The vote will take place tomorrow. And now on our agenda we have 1-minute speeches, and I can inform that members may give their 1-minute speeches from their seats. Mr. Martuccello, to begin. You have the floor.
In Italia, leggo.
When I read Article 21 of the Italian Constitution, Madam President, I don't think about the fact that freedom to demonstrate isn't always a given. For us in Europe, it's a normal thing to be able to go into the street and demonstrate. But for people who live in other parts of the world, in a country like Iran, for example, this right doesn't exist. And you die trying to exercise it. You're hanged in public. Remember in this House what happened today when Maid Reza Ranavad was hanged just for having demonstrated. He was 23 years old. He had a whole life before him, and he was hanged for defending his ideas, for protesting against the injustice of the death of Mahsa Amini. We should think about what's happening in Iran and should come up with sanctions against a country that denies this right. Thank you.
Ora facoltà di intervenire l'onorevole.
Thank you. Mr. Pollack.
Onorevole Pollack. Prego.
Len vďaka osobnej.
Only because of hate by Mr. Sulik, who used to be a coalition partner and minister in a clearly pro-European government of Eduard Heger, the prime minister, Slovakia is threatened with corrupted politicians getting to power, also with Pellegrini. Their nominees are being imprisoned, and they have started pointing to the mishaps by the Pellegrini and their cohorts. We see very influential nominees being locked, and the allegations pointing all the way to the top. Right at the center of Europe, we are seeing that corruption, hand in hand with mafia, are going to tear apart Slovakia from the hands of democracy, and they are going to put it in the hands of mafia. What we see in Slovakia is a huge lesson for all Democrats. We see democracy being threatened by traitors, maybe because of personal ambitions, maybe because of desire for money. They are ready to sell Slovakia, sell it out to fascists, to mafia and oligarchs.
Mr. Tomak, please. Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, free movement of people and goods are fundamental freedoms under the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. But although Romania joined the EU in 2005, these freedoms continue to be denied. Although Romania meets the accession criteria for Schengen as confirmed in 2011, that right is still being trampled underfoot. The Commission has confirmed that Romania is entitled to join Schengen. So has the European Parliament. The only institution refusing without any justification the right for Romania to join the other European countries is the Council of the European Union. As a consequence, the Commission should take the Council to the Court of Justice. They are putting in place a deadlock which runs against the treaties and is anti-European. The next speaker is Mr. Kimkoropoulos.
Thank you very much, Madam President. The problems on the islands as far as the migrant situation is getting worse and worse. It's been going on now since 2015, 2016, and in Greece, the situation is becoming untenable. A very small number of volunteers have to try and deal with all of the migrant flow. There's also giving rise to a lot of pressure on the asylum system as well as the health system in Greece. It's important that people hear the voice of this Parliament, which is calling for a genuine European solution to these problems based on solidarity, which will allow us to help alleviate the human drama which is occurring, and in particular have a fair solution sparing out the burdens between the member states. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Šojdrova.
Děkuji za udělení slova.
Thank you for the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to publicly thank the organizers of the final conference of the European Year of Youth. This took place on the 6th December last week in Brussels. This conference was co-organized by the European Commission, by the Council, as represented by the Czech Presidency, and the European Parliament. What's important? Young people were involved in organizing this. 700 young people filled the European Parliament in Brussels to the brim. This was a unique event, and I hope that next year, which is the European Year of Skills, we shall continue in this common tradition of our cooperation as Council, Commission and Parliament. I would also like to thank the 30 children from basic art schools from the Czech Republic. They performed at this conference. It is not the only event that we organized during this year, but it was the most important one. What we've promised here today, that we shall investigate the corruption allegations at the European Parliament, I want to assure our young people out there we will fulfill these obligations because theirs is the future. We owe them that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Polchak. Please stick to speaking time of 1 minute.
Děkuji, paní předsedkyně. Rusko.
Thank you, Madam President.
Russia is a terrorist state. It systematically kills innocent civilians, leaves behind mines, and bombs, destroy assets and public infrastructure, and harvests. All international crimes of Russia will be investigated. This is a clear message that we've been giving repeatedly to Russia from this plenary. Now we also have to think about aiding Ukraine with the stability of its energy system. We have to come up with a fast assistance with small and large generators, and we have to try to transport energy across borders to Ukraine and try to support or pay for that energy from EU funds. Ukrainians are struggling, they are feeling cold, they don't have enough energy for life. We must not leave
Mr. Lopez Aguilar.
Señora Presidenta.
President, the unjustifiable war of aggression, Putin's war against Ukraine, has meant that this European Parliament has had to adopt a whole series of measures, both to ensure there's no impunity for war criminals, and also we've had to adopt restrictive measures on Russia, its agents and its accomplices. That includes the prohibition on Russian vessels docking in any European Union port. However, the Commission also needs to evaluate the extent to which this is affecting the sustainability of measures as the conflict is extended, in particular when it comes to supplies and foods to countries that are most at need. In particular, in the African subcontinent, we're thinking about strategic ports such as the Las Palmas port. There are Russian vessels that supply pelagic fisheries which contribute to the diet of the African continent. And it's no longer possible for those vessels to dock, and certainly not to go through maintenance in strategic ports such as Las Palmas in order to then go on to provide food to Africa. That in turn exacerbates the food crisis in Africa. So it is good that the Commission is considering the consequences of its decisions. It's important that we should be able to model the consequences so we can ensure that the food crisis in Africa is not exacerbated. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chodaru is our next speaker.
Thank you, Madam President. It's incredible and unforgivable that in this Parliament the votes don't count. We've had 2 votes in Parliament on Romania joining Schengen, but elsewhere they've taken a different direction. Things should be changed. Commission, Council, I'd like Romania no longer to be regarded as a second-class European citizen and to be regarded as a European-level country. Now we've just had a vote against Romania joining Schengen. It's incredible, wrong, and some should not be more equal than others. We should be on a par with French, Austrians, British, Dutch, and so on. The Council should show solidarity, and I'd like you do some very important things. To note that we meet all the conditions and put in a very clear timetable for Romania joining Schengen, and with infringements or sanctions if the timetable is not met for breaching the European Treaty on the functioning of the European Union. Romania has shown solidarity. Council, Commission, we've been behind all European decisions. Please take into account Romania deserves more, including a change to the treaties in the EU. Thank you, and I'd ask you to respect your speaking time, says the President. Otherwise, I'll have to cut you off. It's a minute for everyone.
Stefanuzza.
Mr. Stefanuzza. Romanians were promised 8 new regional hospitals, and that became 3. And in fact, 0 are being financed by the National Recovery and Resilience Plan because the authorities haven't done their job. the government, in fact, doesn't want to build any new hospitals under the national RRP and just work on existing ones. In Sibiu, we had a plan for a regional hospital, but it looks like we're not going to get it approved by the government, and so there will be no new hospital built in the next 10 years because we won't have EU money. Prime Minister Chuka and other ministers, you should put European money behind building a new hospital in Sibiu. The people of Sibiu should not be scapegoats for decisions in Bucharest. The financial bank cannot fund the hospital if the government won't put up at least half of the money from European financing. Give Sibiu a new hospital. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Kelleher.
A total of 187 medicines used by Irish patients are currently in shortage or out of stock, according to the list maintained by the Health Products Regulatory Authority, including 11 that feature on the World Health Organization's critical medicines list.
Daarvan staan op de kritieke geneesmiddelenlijst.
All else for the people who depend on these medicines. One of the main challenges Ireland faces is that of these 187 medicines, 40% are provided by a single supplier, meaning that pharmacists have no alternative to purchase from elsewhere. This is compared to the EU average of 25%. For example, two very important antibiotics, amoxicillin and penicillin, are on this list. Ireland is currently facing some of the very serious challenges with regard to Strep A, and this needs to be addressed. We need a solution that works for all Member States. We need to move to a system whereby Member States have a single unified process of approvals, authorisation, purchasing and reimbursement. I appreciate that Member States have varying purchasing abilities, but a current system actually enables certain pharmaceutical companies to pick and choose those who they supply first, depending on the price they are willing to pay.
Thank you. Mr. Andrews is our next speaker.
Since the European Parliament issued its report on Pegasus last month, many people are stunned at the depth of the scandal. Since then, there have been two further reports on predator software published by Lighthouse Reports and the New York Times. Most Irish people were shocked to learn that an Irish holding company, Thelestris, was responsible for surveillance spyware used against MEPs and journalists, and incredibly sold to the successor of the Janjaweed in Sudan, which committed so many war crimes. This latest information was contained in a report in The Currency, an Irish online publisher. Thelestris should be investigated by both the Irish Revenue and the Office of the Director of Corporate Enforcement, and I would also encourage the Irish Parliament to investigate links between Ireland and the surveillance spyware industry. Ireland should not become a haven for companies involved in violations of human rights around the world and the provision of corporate services to those companies. Sadly, the Irish Government has shared very little information with the European Parliament inquiry and has continued to assert national security when asked if it uses this spyware. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Botos is our next speaker, please.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd also like to say thank you, colleagues, for voting for a debate on the veto put by Austria on my country. It's a wrong, humiliating decision in respect of a people who aren't Eurosceptics, people who very strongly support the European Union, and I am happy to see Commissioner Vălean here in the room. I welcome her. It's a people who believe in the European spirit and European values, and what the Austrian government did, I repeat, is humiliating of those values. We will go on with our struggle. We're not going to give up. And once again, I'd like to thank you as MEPs in the 26 other countries than Romania of the EU for supporting us in this project of joining Schengen.
Thank you. Ms. Miranda is our next speaker.
En janvier 2021, la France a fermé un grand nombre de...
In January 2021, France closed its borders with Spain, including the Col de Banyuls, because of the risk of immigration. It was illegal, and the health risks compared with it. And the route over the Col was guarded. And this wasn't a terrorist issue. It's a ludicrous, surreal situation, and it flies in the face of common sense. There was a lot of mobilisation because only one category of people was being aimed at, honest citizens. This has stopped, for example, health services going across to, and firefighting services can't cross either. This is particularly important when it comes to the wine growing area. And it's absurd to just stop people travelling over this border. So I demand that France open this again without any further major negative impacts on people that have already suffered a great deal. They're talking about supplying extra police to deal with this problem. We want proper controls which won't stop local life from working properly. All you need to do is just people to remember this little bit of the Catalan Pyrenees in Paris. Thanks very much, says the President. Mr. Mariani is our next speaker.
Microphone for the speaker, please.
Pardon, excusez-moi. Nous sommes en train tous.
We are all in the midst of destroying a country with the best possible conscience. Last week, with a delegation of French MPs from all parties, and we visited all sorts of religious groups in Lebanon. They all gave us the same message, Shiite, Sunni or Christian. Today, almost 2 million Syrian refugees are present in a country which has a population of 6 million. It's an impossible burden. You just imagine in France if we were to receive 22 million refugees. The schools can't cope, the hospitals can't cope, and all of this is being aggravated by the economic crisis. We need to act quickly following a very clear roadmap. Today, it would suffice if we accepted that Syrian refugees should return to their country. The EU and Westerners are refusing to recognise their failure in Syria, and we are making a country maintain a third of that population of that country on its territory, and it doesn't have the resources to do that. President, colleagues, in a few months' time it will be too late. No more schools, no hospitals. This in a country which we are in the midst of assassinating, and we simply need to ensure that we authorise NGOs to accompany refugees back to Syria for their sake and to save Lebanon.
Grazie. Facoltà ora di intervenire.
Thank you. Mr. Daré is our next speaker.
L'articolo 80 del Trattato dell'Unione Europea.
Article 80 of the EU Treaty on establishes that EU policies shall be governed by the principle of solidarity and including financially. According to the latest Frontex data, in the first 10 months of the year, over 280,000 irregular crossings occurred, 77% up on 2021. Faced with the migration emergency, Italy was left alone. The so-called EU solidarity remained an empty letter, sadly. Enough by way of promises from the EU. We need rapid management and joint action on migrant flows. Italy cannot be Europe's refugee camp and just Italy alone.
Thank you. Mr. Beck is our next speaker.
Thank you, President. The German Constitutional Court declared last week that the Next Generation EU package and the exception of over 800 billion euros was in line with the treaties. This despite the fact that there are 3 articles of the treaty that would forbid this. 25. Despite this, almost 300 billion has been used by the Commission in a way which would not be for post-COVID recovery, but rather to fund the absurd climate policies. For as long as we have rescue packages unanimously adopted in the Council and the time-limited nature, the purpose can mean that that's not a problem. And this could then be a blueprint for further debt programmes. If the judge has said that it was acceptable to continue with other means, then it might have been honest. Thank you.
Grazie. Facoltà ora di intervenire l'onorevole.
Thank you. Mr. Weimers is our next speaker.
Tack, fru talman. Nyligen kunde vi läsa att 52%...
Thanks, Madam President. At the moment, people are self-censoring at school so that they're not saying things that their students might not like. And we are getting closer and closer to an actual genuine censorship. But we've got these laws about blasphemy which are being imposed. It's a whole problem. But the Council is thinking about supporting these Islamists and weakening one of the main buttresses of our protections in Europe. All sorts of Islamist associations in France are being supported, even though they're a threat to democracy. You've also got the Al-Ghazal Islamist University, which has received money from the European Union not all that long ago. Contributions to this university and other universities are happening. This has to stop. And it's important that we deal with this issue by making it impossible for these contributions to continue. It's freedom in Europe is at stake. Thanks very much. Mr. Nissinen is our next speaker.
Fru talman, Sverigedemokraterna varnade redan från början att coronafonden inte var en temporär åtgärd. För med EU så är ingenting temporärt.
Thank you. There is a system of double standards here. There must be a different action. The EU wants more power, and it's already talking about a new fund on sovereignty. Now, we as Swedish Social Democrats say that's not sustainable. It must stop being a fund, a union based on funds spending taxpayers' money, and must become more competitive. That's where the real strength must lie among the member states. The EU should stop thinking that it will always achieve solutions by aggregating more power in Brussels. It will just lead to waste.
Mr. Hoogveen is our next speaker.
Voorzitter, het gebouw van het Europees Parlement in Brussel heeft een stabiliteitsprobleem en verzakt, letterlijk, in het moeras. Vorige week werden de
President, we have reached an impasse. There were complaints made last week. We have seen costs rising of €1 billion. We're here in Strasbourg, the seat of the European Parliament, in this very sophisticated building with all of the facilities that it has. And it's only used for a few days a month. Moving to Strasbourg cost €200 million, and as if that weren't enough, now the European Parliament is going to give an advance of €1 billion for a building which is about 400 metres away from here. It won't lead us anywhere useful, and that's why I think that we should permanently move the European Parliament to Strasbourg. Then we could save taxpayers' money and we could leave the buildings in Brussels to their fate. Thank you.
Mr. Terrier is our next speaker.
Thank you. I publicly demand the EPP chair, Mr. Manfred Weber, to immediately and unconditionally expel from EPP the party led by the Austrian Chancellor Karl Nehammer. On December 8, 2022, Austria voted to abusively block the entrance of Romania and Bulgaria in Schengen, even though both countries met all the requirements to join this area. We were not, and we are not, asking for privileges, not for mercy from anyone, including Austria. Romania gained its national right to be part of Schengen after paying a heavy and expensive price. From the Romanian taxpayers' money we are protecting and defending the borders from illegal immigration, so not only us, but also other countries like Austria will be protected and safe. Romania respects the obligation of the Schengen acquis, and for over 11 years, the Commission and the European Parliament stated in multiple reports and resolutions that it's fully prepared to join Schengen. Despite all these undeniable facts, the Austrian Chancellor decided to abusively violate Romania's right to join Schengen so he can gain political points. This is simply unacceptable. Mr. Weber, if you are a man of your word and care about the European solidarity, I publicly urge you to expel from your party the party of the Austrian Chancellor. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you. Mr. Pineda is our next speaker.
Gracias, Presidenta. Hoy comienza.
Thank you, President. A hearing begins today which aims to determine whether a diplomat has diplomatic immunity or not. Once again, the United States is disregarding international law and diplomacy as a basis for international relations. On the 12th of June 2020, the United States managed to get Cape Verde to detain the Venezuelan diplomat Alex Saab. Despite the economic blockade on Venezuela, he had managed to get his people much-needed medicines and fuel during the pandemic. As a member of the Social Affairs Bureau, a full member, for more than a year, he has worked on this issue, and he was taken illegally to the US. This is a matter for all countries. His trial is a violation of international law and makes a mockery of the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. We cannot allow this, especially in the current crisis of conflict around the world. This European plenary must solemnly defend diplomacy as the way to peace, and we must call for the immediate release of the diplomat Alex Saab. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Daly is our next speaker.
Thanks, President. Last Thursday, we attended the appeal hearing in Lesvos of two Afghan refugees, Amir Zahiri and Akif Rassouli, against a 50-year sentence given to them for smuggling when they were simply passengers on a boat from Turkey seeking refuge in Greece. A boat which the Greek Coast Guard attempted to push back and damaged, a journey which ended with them spending almost 3 years in jail for a crime which the court admitted there was no evidence against Rassouli and very clear against Zahiri. An appeal which took 4 visits to the court, including a delay of 8 months at one stage to get a Coast Guard present, and in the end he didn't show up at all. So while I welcome the fact that they are now free, it is an outrage that migrants continue to be criminalised and tortured in Greece. It's against the UN protocol against smuggling. Thousands upon thousands remain in Greek jails for the so-called crime of boat driving. This is an abomination. When is the EU going to call Greece to account and respect and observe fundamental rights? This is your Europe. This is your values.
Thank you. Mr. Wallace is our next speaker.
In Latin America in the past week, we've seen politically motivated lawfare against Argentine Vice President Cristina Fernandez and a right-wing coup against the President of Peru, Pedro Castillo. The EU shows its true colours in the face of these events, just as it did when they supported the illegal military coup against Morales in 2019 in Bolivia. If the leader being overthrown, convicted or imprisoned is indigenous or a socialist, that means order is being restored, and lies are repeated to justify the anti-democratic actions. If the leader losing out is white, a capitalist oligarch, a far-right racist, or descendant of colonialists and dictators, the EU is up in arms. Crushing sanctions must be imposed, assets frozen, and calls for new elections abound. The corrupt white settler elites and cronies of the political West must be kept in power at all costs. The voice of the people is only respected when it suits. European leaders and capitalist elites don't seem to give a damn about democracy.
Ha facoltà di intervenire ora l'onorevole
Thank you. Mr. Pimenta Lopez is our next speaker. Thank you, Madam President. Alex Saab was arrested illegally in June 2020 in Cape Verde and a year later transferred to the United States. He's therefore been detained for more than 2 years. It's a clear violation of international law and its interference and destabilisation attempt really by the US to blackmail the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and its people. This also includes illegal arbitrary sanctions, the so-called democratic plan for transition in Venezuela, and it's a complete failure to respect the will of the people of Venezuela. Alex Saab was a diplomat who looked for a peaceful solution to the problems of Venezuela and to improve the living conditions of Venezuelans, and the US has tried to stop him from doing that. We'd like to express our solidarity with the people of Venezuela, defending their independence, and we call for the release of Alex Saab and an end of the US's attempt to destabilise Venezuela. Thank you, President. Thank you. Mr. Koza is our next speaker, please.
Minden jel arra utal, hogy a demokratikus választások eddig legdurvább befolyásolási kísérletek.
Thank you. To date, the democratic elections have been threatened by Hungarian opposition groups. There have been millions of people received from other countries, and a majority of 2/3, which has been obtained legitimately. This was voted through by citizens. But money has gone into developing a left-wing opposition, and we've had all sorts of declarations about interventions. And it's giving a very poor image of my country. And this is particularly because there are people trying to use their money to buy votes. Many of you will have heard these lies that were paid for by dollars that were fed into the left in Hungary. And there is now a corruption scandal that we've seen in the European Parliament itself, and that shows you again that the left can be bought, just whether it's the European or Hungarian left.
Prego.
Mr. Giarrusso.
Colleghi, quest'Aula, questa istituzione.
Ladies and gentlemen, this chamber costs billions of euros every year to the European citizen, and much also depends on our work and the trust given to us. In recent days, bags of cash hidden at home and the scarce respect shown to MEPs by foreign countries, and where members and ex-MEPs and trade unions have behaved immoderately, has been one of the saddest chapters in the history of this institution. Now, they can't destroy the work done by others, but here there are 450 million Europeans to defend. We must show that we rise above this disgusting mess. Otherwise, this institution, these buildings, our work will make no sense at all.
Thank you, Mr. Giarrusso. That was the last speaker, so the sitting is suspended. We'll start tomorrow at 9 a.m. on Tuesday, the 13th of December. The agenda has been published on the European Parliament's website, and the minutes of this session will be made available by noon tomorrow. That's the end of tonight's sitting, and good night to everybody.
j'imagine le juriste qui t'invite,
Mais il nous faut quelqu'un qui me dise comment va se passer.
C'est quoi, là maintenant?
Oui, je veux savoir quelle est la politique.
C'est celui-là que je pourrais m'inventer. C'est Victor Orban, mais tu prends la place, pardon? Tu es là.
Jumping. Sorry.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Can I ask you please to take the floor? Dear colleagues, good afternoon. I think it would be no exaggeration to say that these have been among the longest days of my career. I must choose my words carefully, in a manner that does not jeopardize ongoing investigations or in any way undermine the presumption of innocence. And I will. So if my fury, my anger, my sorrow do not come across, please be assured that they are very much present, along with my determination for this House to grow stronger. Make no mistake, the European Parliament, dear colleagues, is under attack. European democracy is under attack, and our way of open, free, democratic societies are under attack. The enemies of democracy, for whom the very existence of this Parliament is a threat, will stop at nothing. These malign actors linked to autocratic third countries have allegedly weaponized NGOs, unions, individuals, assistants and members of the European Parliament in an effort to subdue our processes. Their malicious plans failed. Our services, of whom I am incredibly proud, have been working with relevant national law enforcement and judicial authorities to break up this alleged criminal network for some time. We have acted in sync with authorities to ensure that all legal steps are respected, that all information is preserved, and that where needed, IT equipment is secured, offices are sealed, and house searches are able to be carried out. I accompanied a Belgian judge and police as required by the Belgian Constitution to a house search last weekend. As a precautionary measure, again with full respect for the presumption of innocence, I have stripped the Vice President mentioned of any tasks and responsibilities related to their role as Vice President, and I have convened an extraordinary meeting of the Conference of Presidents to launch an Article 21 procedure to bring their term as Vice President to an end in an effort to protect the integrity of this House. I was also scheduled today to announce the opening of the negotiating mandate for the visa waiver report with Qatar and Kuwait. In light of the investigations, this report must be sent back to committee. I also know that we are not at the end of the road, and we will continue to assist in investigations together with other EU institutions for as long as it takes. Corruption cannot pay, and we have played our part in ensuring these plans could not materialise. And I must be clear, the allegations are not about left or right or north or south. This is about right and wrong. And I would appeal to you to resist the temptation to exploit this moment for political gain. Do not cheapen the threat that we are facing. Now, I am in politics, like so many of you here, to fight corruption, to stand up for the principles of Europe. This is a test of our values and of our systems. And colleagues, let me assure you that we will meet this test head-on. There will be no impunity, none. Those responsible will find this Parliament on the side of the law, and I am proud of our role and assistance in this investigation. There will be no sweeping under the carpet. We will launch an internal investigation to look at all the facts related to the Parliament and to look at how our systems can become yet more watertight. There will be no business as usual. We will launch a reform process to see who has access to our premises, how these organisations, NGOs and people are funded, what links with third countries they have. We will ask for more transparency on meetings with foreign actors and those linked to them.
Vom îmbunătăți acest sistem, așadar.
Parliament and these towns, and I need your help to do it. We will protect those who help us expose criminality, and I will work to look at our whistleblower systems to see how can they be made stronger. But I must also say that while we can always look to increase deterrence and transparency, there will always be some for whom a bag of cash is always worth the risk. And what is essential is that these people understand that they will get caught, that our services work, and that they will face the full extent of the law, as happened in this case. These are challenging times for us all, but I know and I am convinced that if we work together, we can come out of it stronger. To you, my colleagues who have lived these days with me, let me say again how deeply disappointed I am. I know you all share the same sentiment. And to those malign actors in third countries who think they can buy their way forward, who think Europe is for sale, who think they can take over our NGOs, let me say that you will find this Parliament firmly in your way. We are Europeans. We would rather be cold than bought. And now, dear colleagues, together with an agreement of the political groups, and before we officially start this plenary meeting, I will give the floor to the group leaders, starting with Manfred Weber.
Madam President, dear colleagues, we as the EPP Group are shocked. The corruption charges against one of our highest representatives of this European Parliament has significantly damaged our institution and affected the trust of people in the European Union as a whole. The damage to European democracy is too big to be now used for party political battles. Let's be clear about this. We are, as EPP Group, extremely worried because we feel that the credibility of the only directed elected institution in Europe is put in danger by the actions of the people concerned. It will take more than this debate to restore some of the trust that has been lost. As they say, trust comes on foot, but it leaves on a horse. On the one side, no rule can stop criminals, but on the other side, we as EPP Group, we are ready to improve our rules to make them better for the future. Everybody of us is sitting here with the feeling of responsibility, and to fight corruption is one of it. Corruption is the biggest enemy of democracy. It undermines the freedom of speech. It breaks the trust of people have in their institutions of state. To be crystal clear, there is not any room for corruption in that parliament or in other institutions of the European Union. The laws must be applied strictly and the prosecution has to be followed consequently. And we express as EPP our gratitude to the Belgian police and the public prosecutor for their investigation and their actions. There is no any question that this House will cooperate fully with the rest of these investigations. I want to thank you, Madam President Roberta Metsola, for your clear and important cooperation at the beginning of this difficult development. Fight against corruption is key. That is the only way to regain the trust of the European people in the institution, in the European Parliament, in the heart of democracy in Europe.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. And now, on behalf of the S&D Group, Irache Garcia Perez.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, President. I'd like to...
Que este es un día negro, es un día muy triste para la democracia europea y es un día también muy triste y muy difícil para el Grupo Socialdemócrata, y por eso quiero anunciarles que acabamos de tomar la decisión de personarnos como parte perjudicada en el proceso judicial que se va a abrir en estos momentos.
Excuse me, Irache, there is no interpretation into English of your statement. Can we please? Excuse me. Okay, start again. I don't hear anything in my...
Can you hear the English booth?
Okay, now it's okay.
Okay, pues voy a empezar desde el...
Thank you. I'll start from the beginning. I wanted to start by saying that I'm sure that I can speak for the vast majority of this House by saying that this is a dark day for European democracy. It's a very sad day, and as you will understand, it's also a very difficult day for the Social and Democrat group. And for those reasons, I wanted to say that we have just taken a decision. We will regard ourselves as a prejudice party when it comes to the judicial process, which is about to be opened. And that is because the criminal behaviour of some individuals is a stain on this institution and is a stain on the credibility of the European Union. There is a legal investigation ongoing, and those who are guilty will need to pay for that. But this House must also respond firmly to get to the bottom of what has happened and also to guarantee that this never happens again. For those reasons, I appeal to people to show responsibility and stand united. I've already spoken to the President and the leaders of the other political groups. I hope that we can work together to increase transparency and increase accountability. European citizens should know that they can count on us to clarify the facts and to work together with the judicial system, because the daily work that the vast majority of members in this House are doing is not something that should be overshadowed. We are talking about specific measures in different bodies of this Parliament, and it's also necessary that those discussions continue in other European institutions. We must act firmly to stamp out corruption. We must defend honesty in politics, and we must do this by working together, because it is by standing united that we can best fight corruption and those who want to undermine European democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Irache. On behalf of the Renew Europe Group, now Stéphane Séjourné.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Chers collègues.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, on behalf of my group, let me begin by thanking the Belgian police and legal system, the arm of our democracy. And I read the tweets from Mr. Orban, who's already trying to exploit this. I think of the people of Hungary who don't have an independent legal system which would carry out any kind of anti-corruption activities. I'm proud that I work in a country where such inquiries are possible. First of all, our institution needs, as you have done, Madam President, to express its total solidarity and cooperation with the legal authorities. That, of course, doesn't mean that we should just wait for the legal procedure to run its course. Far from it. My group will propose actions which will, I think, be something which will enjoy broad consensus in this House. We'll, as other groups, will vote for the withdrawal of the vice presidential position from Mrs. Kaili. We need to give a signal to that effect. And, of course, if the accusations are proven true, we'll ask her to resign. When it comes to Qatar, Madam President, we call, as you've said, is going to happen for the issues that were voted on during the committee stage. And in the light of the ongoing inquiries, my group, of course, will support the referral back to committee of those particular items. When it comes finally to the transparency of political life, we, of course, support the idea of transparency registers. It's an idea that's long been mooted in this House, but now we definitely need specific rules on this. Since 2019, my group has been calling for an interinstitutional moral body dealing with not just MEPs, but former MEPs, as well as everyone else who works in the European institutions. On the question of interference, as you rightly said, Madam President, we are also in favour of addressing this once, of course, the legal procedure has run its course and light has been thrown on these events. Let me end by saying that my group will work with the institution. Renew Europe will always be there, fighting for democracy and transparency, fighting against corruption. We can't allow our work to be besmirched, or this Parliament or Europe to be besmirched. Nobody would be able to do this kind of thing with impunity. The people of Europe don't deserve that, and we can assure our fellow citizens that the European people, the European Parliament, is going to stand firm.
Merci, Stefan. Now I give the floor to Terry Reintke on behalf of the Green Group.
Thank you, Madam President. I can only echo what the colleagues have been saying. These are dark days for European democracy. And I can tell you personally, colleagues, that I have always been a very proud member of this Parliament. To me, it's the honor of my life to be elected to this Parliament. And in the last days, honestly, this pride has seriously been shaken. And I myself know that most of us here are working hard, that we are honest and sincere in representing the EU citizens. But now I'm actually thinking about the millions of EU citizens who are struggling right now, the people who are lying awake at night, who do not know how to pay their bills, who do not know how to get through the next month, and what they had to see over the past days. And I think this puts shame on all of us here in this Parliament. And we have to be absolutely clear. This Parliament, after what happened, cannot do business as usual. We cannot stop at just thoughts and prayers. We have to be absolutely clear. We have to act. And I want us to act, as the colleagues have said, unitedly, as pro-European Democrats. But we have to act, and we also have to put something in written to be clear about what we want, because we want a full inquiry into this matter. Everything has to come to the surface right now, because, as people have said, trust has been broken. We have to have a dedicated position in the EP Bureau that is working on these reforms, that is working on anti-corruption, and we need to have more far-reaching measures, like, for example, the reform of the lobby register, but also an ethics body that can make sure that we do everything in our power to present something like this in the future. Indeed, colleagues, trust of citizens has been broken, and to my understanding, rightfully so. So let us do everything we can to bring everything to light and to prevent something like this from happening again in the future. This is about more than just us. This is about protecting this House. This is about protecting democracy. This is about protecting the European project. So let us do all we can We owe it to ourselves and we owe it to our citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry. Next is Marco Zanni on behalf of the ID Group. Prego.
Grazie Presidente, grazie per...
Thank you, President. Thank you for your words at this difficult time. What is going on over these days, I think, is so far from the culture that should cloak this institution that it becomes very difficult even to find the words to comment on it. We are all deeply shocked by what is happening in these recent hours with serious accusations against high-ranking members of this Assembly, or past members, and various associated staff. For our group, it's clear and essential that this group must take up a strong, resolute position on this, because too often the attitude we've seen in the past, in months gone by, is one that hasn't helped this institution, with colleagues who have spoken out against foreign interference, just as a report on foreign interference is being released by the Parliament with often unsubstantiated comments. Sometimes people don't remove the beam from their own eye when commenting on the speck of dust in others. I think there's a degree of hypocrisy on some sensitive issues here. It's clear that all may make mistakes, may commit errors, but what has happened, frankly unsustainable in this parliamentary term and must change, is, I believe, the attitude of moral superiority that some take on. And this huge scandal that we're experiencing is just the umpteenth proof for that. Now, above and beyond the immediate action that we must put in place to uphold the respectability of this institution, I believe we must do some deeper-rooted work, and this Parliament must fully investigate whether there is any political responsibility behind these facts, and that we must build a new attitude. Too often, there's a lot of self-referentialism that has harmed the EU institutions and this institution. Thank you.
On behalf of the ECR Group, I give the floor to Richard Legutko.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, there is not much to be said. A lot of facts have already come out, and I'm sure more will come out in the future. Perhaps some of them quite surprising in a most unpleasant sort of way. But you were right, of course, Madam President, that European Parliament was targeted by the bad guys, and probably they consider the Parliament to be a place with several weak spots, and indeed they succeeded to a degree that shocked a lot of us. So I always wonder and ask myself, to what extent is it a problem of personal weaknesses of our colleagues, former colleagues or staffers, and to what extent is it a problem of a system, of a structure and rules and procedures? Probably both elements should be taken into account, and I wish there could be some kind of critical, objective analysis of this phenomenon. After all, this is a huge institution, very complex and not easy to manage. But such a critical analysis should be conducted by somebody from outside, not from our midst, for obvious reasons, that we are more interested in sustaining this institution and defending it, no matter what we say openly. So I would suggest that we should have a sort of critical description of the way such an institution functions. Perhaps that would give us an insight into what was wrong and how to prevent similar developments from happening in the future. And one last point, one thing that will certainly not improve the reputation of European Parliament, pompous, highfalutin rhetoric. I mean, this will not help. I mean, I have an impression that we very much like to indulge in sort of lofty language that didn't help in the future, hasn't helped and won't help. Just do something real. We want the real thing, not rhetoric. Rhetoric is a very easy thing.
Thank you very much. Richard, I give the floor now to Manon Aubry on behalf of the Left Group.
Merci, Madame la Thank you, President. Colleagues, I think we can say very clearly that the European Parliament has been caught up in the worst corruption scandal of its history. Qatar has bought the votes of this Assembly in order to cover up the exploitation of migrant workers who will work to death on the World Cup infrastructure. The facts are shocking. Over €1 million has been seized from the homes of suspects, the Vice President of the Parliament behind bars. The integrity of our institutions is at stake. But here, I really want to send a very clear message to Qatar. You cannot buy members like you can buy football clubs. Of course, it's shocking, but colleagues, I'm not really surprised. Given how clear the interference of Qatar was for over a year, our group has been calling for a debate and resolution to be held on human rights violations surrounding the World Cup in Qatar, and some groups were systematically opposed to that. When we finally did get it, when it came to the negotiations, I noticed that some groups were taking advantage of the fact that there were negotiations behind closed doors to try to play down criticism of Qatar. And they were trying to defend the interests of Qatar to the point that they were adding things that had nothing to do with the resolution in question. So, of course, the investigation currently concerns a political group, the Socialist Group, but money has no odour, and you find corruption in all sorts of places. And we know that the former President Nicolas Sarkozy is subject to an investigation regarding Qatar. And then there has also been constant praise from Commissioner Margarita Schinas, which might also raise questions as regards Qatar. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. And of course, the President of the Vice President should step down. But what world are we living in where we have to call for that and she doesn't simply step down herself? And secondly, I think, colleagues, that we need to have a committee of inquiry set up in the Parliament in order to look at how vulnerable European institutions are to corruption and conflicts of interest. And finally, if we're to deal with this kind of problem effectively in the future, then we do need to ensure that we pick up on things such as an independent ethics body, an issue which was not taken up before, so that we can have that in place. Our reaction, our condemnation should be unanimous. We should speak out loud here in the European Parliament to make it clear that democracy is not up for sale. Thank you.
Ms. Aubry, this concludes this round. So we go back to our agenda. The minutes and the text adopted of the sitting of the 24th of November are available. If there are no comments, the minutes are approved. I have a few announcements to come. So the LIBE Committee has adopted 2 mandates to enter into interinstitutional negotiations pursuant to Rule 71, Paragraph 1 of the Rules of Procedure on third countries whose nationals are subject to or exempt from a visa requirement, Kuwait and Qatar, and the European Union Drugs Agency. For the first file on third countries whose nationals are subject to or exempt from a visa requirement, as I said earlier, on Kuwait and Qatar, I have decided, with the agreement of the political groups, to propose a referral back to committee of this file pursuant to Rule 198. I understand that the rapporteur would like to take the floor, and I give the floor to Eric Marquardt.
Ja, vielen Dank, Frau Präsidentin. Ich habe in den letzten Tagen
Thank you, President. In the last days, not just those who've been involved in this, but colleagues with different groups I've spoken to, and there seems to be a rare sense of community. We're all shocked about what has been aired and have the view that corruption is an attack on democracy and must carry severe consequences for those who have been corrupted and serious consequences for those who are bought, and also the EU institutions need to do everything in their power to prevent the recurrence of such events. And in that sort of situation, we can't allow a state potentially attacking our democracy to receive visa freedom. So first of all, we must ensure that there's been no influencing of that process and ensure that we're drawing the right lessons. And we must ensure that we don't get into negotiations on visa liberalisation. So we appeal to Rule 198 for a referral back to the committee. Thank you.
I put this proposal to a vote. Who is in favour? Who is against? Who abstains? Okay, that is adopted. Then the motion is carried and the file is referred back. Regarding the other LIBE mandate on the European Union Drugs Agency, pursuant to Rule 71, paragraph 2, members or political groups reaching at least the medium threshold may request in writing by tomorrow, Tuesday 13th December at midnight, that the decision to enter into negotiations be put to the vote. If no request for a vote is made, the committee may start the negotiations. The reports which constitute the mandate for the negotiation is available on the plenary webpage, and its title will be published in the minutes of the sitting. The S&D group has communicated to me that Ms. Eva Kaili is no longer a member of the group as of 9th of December 2022, and she sits with the non-attached members. Mr. Pascal Durand is no longer a member of the Renew Europe group and has joined the S&D group as of the 30th of November 2022. The competent authorities of Italy have notified me of the election of Ms. Beatrice Covassi to the European Parliament, replacing Ms. Simona Bonafè with effect from the 6th of December 2022. I wish to welcome our new colleague and recall that she takes her seat in Parliament and its bodies in full enjoyment of her rights, pending the verification of her credentials. In accordance with Article 7 of the Code of Conduct for Members of the European Parliament with respect to financial interests and conflicts of interest, I decided to appoint Mr. Gilles Boyer as member of the Advisory Committee on the Conduct of Members, replacing Mr. Pascal Durand with effect from 7 December 2022. The S&D, Renew Europe, Greens, ID and ECR groups and the non-attached members have notified me of decisions relating to changes to appointments within committees and delegations. These decisions will be set out in the minutes of today's sitting and take effect on the date of this announcement. I have received from Council its position at first reading, as well as the reasons which led to its adoption and the positions and opinions of the Commission. The full title will be listed in the minutes of the sitting. The 3-month period available to Parliament to adopt its positions will therefore begin as from tomorrow, 13th of December. I would also like to inform you that since the adjournment of Parliament session on the 24th of November, I have signed, together with the President of the Council, one act adopted under the ordinary legislative procedure in accordance with Rule 79 of the Parliament's rules. I would also like to inform you that on Wednesday I shall sign, together with the President of the Council, 11 acts adopted under the ordinary legislative procedure. The titles of the acts will be published in the minutes of this sitting. I would also like to inform you that I have received a request for urgent procedure from the Council pursuant to Rule 163 on macro-financial assistance plus instrument providing support to Ukraine for 2023. The vote on this request will be taken tomorrow, and if adopted, the vote will be held on Thursday. Since this is a second reading procedure, should no proposal to reject the Council's position and no amendments be tabled, the proposed act will be announced as adopted pursuant to Rule 69. We now move to changes requested by political groups. Ms. Langen-Siepen, I know you have a point of order. Do you want to make it on this point, or can it be made after the announcements? Okay, I will give you the floor then. So, on the agenda, we have 5 groups that have asked for a debate on our introductory debate on the suspicions of corruption. What I would propose is that I ask the first group who submitted the request, which is the left group, to submit its request. So Ms. Aubry will present it. We will then see whether there is a majority for that request. After that, we will proceed to see whether there is a majority for a resolution. Manon, you have the floor. We'll take it from there first.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, President. This won't take long. We've just talked about the main points at issue, and it will be strange in the final session of the year, just after the scandal broke, if we weren't to hold a debate when each member here who's shocked and angry could express their views. We need to talk about this, which will allow us to draw certain conclusions as to how we should follow up on all of this for our various institutions, because things can't be allowed to continue as they are. But let me make it clear that we're calling for a debate and, as a separate vote, a resolution. We need to see the wood for the trees, Madam President. We need to draw conclusions that are political, and we're talking about an independent political body looking at people's behaviour, and this scandal goes beyond external countries and lobby groups. It's not a question of just banning them from the Parliament. It's not a supermarket, after all.
The group has asked, to be clear, that a Commission statement on suspicions of corruption from Qatar and the broader need for transparency and accountability in the European institutions to be debated. Can I ask whether anybody wants to speak against? Asita Kanko, on behalf of the ECR group.
Of course, I don't want to speak against, but the ECR group has an idea. Oh, are you surprised? Don't be.
It's okay. Go ahead, Asita.
Yeah. So the ECR group would like to propose another title, namely the corruption allegation against members, staff and former members of the European Parliament. We support the initiative, but we think it's quite clear that there have been corruption, and we don't want to speak about suspicions. The title must be clear. We, the European Parliament, are not for sale. We are lawmakers. And also we request the vote to happen as a roll call vote, because we need to be transparent in this House and towards the citizens today on this.
Okay, so Ms. Kanko, thank you very much. We will vote first on the proposal of the left group, and if that has a majority, then the other motions fall. Yes, it will be recorded. I open the vote. I close the votes. And it is adopted, and therefore we will have a debate on Tuesday in the afternoon and we will now see the majorities for whether we should have a resolution. Who is in favour of having a resolution? Stéphane, you want to take the floor?
Oui, pour être très clair, Madame la Présidente.
Yes, just to be clear on our position. I think this is a position which is shared, including among groups who may vote against the resolution for the time being. We're not hostile to the idea of a resolution. We do think that we need to learn lessons from this, but we need to take some time to look into the issue, perhaps come back to it in January. and see whether we have a legal procedure which might have closed by that point, and then we might have some conclusions that we can draw from that. We're right in the midst of the legal case at the moment, and there are still people investigating Parliament premises. I don't know that this is perhaps the best way for the Parliament to deal with it, having a resolution straight away. So we're in favour of a resolution, but at a later stage, so we'll be voting against.
Mr. Weber? Manfred, please.
Frau Präsidentin, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen.
Madam President, colleagues. Colleagues were asked to come to the COP to take first measures and to react. It's important we have quick reactions from Parliament, and we want to ensure there's a broad pro-European, pro-democratic consensus on this matter. So clear decisions will be taken tomorrow morning already in the COP. The left is making a proposal. I think we'll have enough time for debates this week, so keeping those ideas in the back of my mind, I would support and emphasise Mr. Séjourné's proposal so that when facts are produced by the investigating authorities, we can fall in behind it then.
To have a resolution this week for the vote, I open the vote. I close the vote, and it is adopted. Ms. Kanko, you wanted to take the floor? Go ahead.
Yes, I would like to request to vote again on the proposal about Qatar, because it was very confusing. We could vote, for example, first on the title and then on the decision. Otherwise, it will give the impression that some members who wanted another title are against the idea of having a debate and a resolution. Could we vote again on a more clear way, please, Madam President? Thank you.
Ms. Kanko, I cannot do that, but you can explain your vote and the procedure, and you can participate in the debate and on the resolution, now that the decision for have a resolution has been taken. Next point is on Monday, the Renew Group has asked. Oh, this is also the same. For Tuesday, the S&D, EPP and Renew groups have requested that Council and Commission statements on the recent JHA Council decision on Schengen accession be added as the second point in the afternoon after the question time to the Commission. As a consequence, the sitting would be extended until 11 p.m. I give the floor to Mr. Dan Nika to move the request. Wait, the microphone, please. 126. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much, President. The JHA Council last week saw Romania and Bulgaria wrongly and absolutely incorrectly left out of Schengen, and it overturned the decision by this Parliament on the accession of Romania and Bulgaria in March. We had a question time. We need to look at the JHA decision taken, and therefore we need to put it on the agenda for 2023.
I don't see that to be the case, so I put the request to a vote by roll call. I open the vote. I close the vote. And it is adopted, and therefore we will have Council and Commission statements on the recent JHA Council decision on Schengen accession to be added as the second point in the afternoon after the question time to the Commission, and as a consequence, this sitting will be extended until 11 p.m. Now, for Wednesday, the Renew Group has requested that the Council and Commission give statements on defending the European Union against the abuse of national vetoes to be added as a second point in the afternoon. As a consequence, the sitting would be extended until 11. I give the floor to Mr. Guy Verhofstadt to move the request on behalf of his group.
I think that it's obvious why an additional point on Wednesday afternoon would be added on defending the European Union against the abuse of national vetoes, because everybody can see today what is happening with national vetoes. On every file, More and more of these files are blocked today, the last days, the last weeks. Migration strategy, Schengen, electoral law, energy price cap on gas, taxation policy, the minimum rate on multinationals, further sanctions, and further also the financial aid to Ukraine, where we need to find now a solution with 26 instead of a solution inside the Union. So it's clear that, in my opinion, vetoes are an instrument for blackmailing the Union, and it is increasing for the moment. I know that we asked for that a convention to seriously discuss this, and again, due to the lack of consensus, the Council is not in a position to respond to that request. So I know that we have a discussion Wednesday with the European Council, but it's only 2 hours. What we're going to discuss is Ukraine, and we're going to discuss energy. So I request that we need an urgently debate before the Council on Thursday, and my proposal would be to add that item Wednesday afternoon as the second point on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Verhofstadt. I give the floor to any colleague who would like to speak against. I don't see that to be the case, so I put the request to a vote by roll call. Vote is open. Vote is closed. And it is adopted, and therefore we will have Council and Commission statements as the second point on Wednesday afternoon. For Wednesday as well, the EPP Group has asked that a Commission statement on the impact on rule of law of recent developments in Spain be added as the fifth point in the afternoon. As a consequence, the sitting is already extended until 11 p.m. I give the floor to Mr. Paulo Rangel to move the request on behalf of the EPP Group. Number 14, please.
Here.
No, not yet. Okay.
Now it is. Thank you. So, the EPP requests an additional debate on this issue of rule of law, strengthening the institutions and judicial independence. There are worrying developments in some EU countries, namely in Spain, towards less independence of the judiciary and more governmental intervention in it, in breach of the rule of law principles. The President of the Government has recently announced his intention of taking unilateral measures on the judiciary that clearly go against everything that the European Union values and principles defend. The playing rules cannot be changed for political interests in order to place former members of government in the National Constitutional Court, and to change the criminal code cannot be handed over to convicted criminals to decide which crimes to suppress or downgrade, such as sedition and corruption. This is not a national debate. We see, we listen, we read. And if we read, we listen and we see, we cannot pretend that worrying developments are going on in Spain.
Okay.
We should not have a double pattern.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rangel. Would anyone want to speak against? No, so we put the request to the vote by roll call. I open the vote. I close the vote. And it is rejected, so the agenda is unchanged. On Thursday, the EPP Group has requested that the Commission statement on the 30th anniversary of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Persons belonging to national or ethnic, religious and linguistic minorities be wound up by a resolution to be voted on Thursday. I give the floor to Mr. Laurent Vince to move the request on behalf of the EPP Group.
Thank you, Madam President. On Sunday, the 18th of December, we celebrate the World Minority Rights Day. This date also marks the 30-year anniversary since the adoption of the Declaration on the Rights of Persons Belonging to National or Ethnic, Religious and Linguistic Minorities. It is the only UN international human rights instrument devoted to minority rights, and it is built on the core idea that the rights of minorities are vital to advancing political and social stability and preventing conflicts. This September, at the anniversary high-level meeting organised in New York, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said that the world still falls far short in action supporting minorities. The Parliament should also echo his call. We welcome the debate planned for Thursday morning on the topic. On behalf of the EPP Group, I propose that, in a manner consistent with our action on previous UN declarations, we also adopt a resolution. Commitment to fundamental values and to a principled foreign policy stance would demand a strong voice of the Parliament on this matter, and I hope all the political groups would support this request. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vince. Does anybody want to speak against? No? Then I put the request to the vote. By roll call, I open the vote. I close the vote, and it is rejected. That concludes our agenda discussion, and I give the floor to Ms. Langensiepen to make her point.
Test. It's working.
Yes, it's
working.
working.
Please, colleagues, could you wait and sit down for a moment? It's on human rights and not on corruption. Thanks for listening. On the 3rd of December, we celebrated the International Disability Day. On the 6th of December, few colleagues, me and EDF, organized an event on that, and the host of that event, Madame Nikolsonova, and her team applied for an accessible room for that event because it was about persons with disabilities, and persons with disabilities were invited. What we got was a room who was not accessible for our wheelchair-using guests. Even when I apply for my voting machine, it's always a fight to get it, and for 2 times, colleagues had to vote instead of me. That's against the law, by the way.
Ze hebben al 2 keer voor mij moeten stemmen. Dat is tegen de
Commission. No, I don't call the Commission. I call for the Secretariat. That maybe in next year, and 24th, and maybe for the next generation, it's possible to have an accessible Parliament in Strasbourg and in Brussels. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Langensiepen. You are absolutely right, and we will do our best to make sure this doesn't happen again with different measures that we can take. I will speak to the relevant services. Thank you. We move to the first item.
I kindly ask to leave everybody who is not staying for the next debate to leave the plenary silently. Wir kommen zum nächsten Punkt auf unserer.
So we'll come on to the next item on our agenda. And I would like to emphasise every word that the President has said. This Parliament stands for transparency and democracy. But we're coming on to the report of Ms Pelletier towards equal rights for persons with disabilities. And I'd like to start by giving the floor, of course, to the rapporteur, Ms Pelletier, please.
Sehr geehrte Frau Pelletier, ich muss Sie
Dear Ms Pelletier, unfortunately I am going to have to interrupt because we don't have interpretation. I don't know whether that is true of other colleagues, but unfortunately I don't have any interpretation, and I'd like to know if we can clear that up, and perhaps you could start your speech again. One moment, please.
Ich muss Ihnen aus den Dolmetschkabinen mit.
I can inform you from the interpreting booths, I've been told politely but clearly that we don't have interpretation from sign language in the languages which are interpreted today. And for those reasons, I must ask you to use one of the official languages when you give your speech. I, however, have understood your message very well, and I think that this is an excellent opportunity to include sign language into the list of official languages.
Was mache ich? Ich spreche oder was mache ich now?
Do I speak now? I'm asking you whether you could give your speech in one of the official languages which are included in the list of speeches, but your message has come across very clearly.
Chers collègues, voilà ce que vivent.
So, colleagues, you've just seen what persons with disabilities have to go through every day. You couldn't understand what I was saying. All I was saying was that in Europe I wasn't allowed to finish my speech because the sign language is not a recognised official language of the EU. But I just said that many persons with disabilities are discriminated against in Europe, that accessibility to work and fundamental rights is far from being guaranteed. My report was drawn up with a great deal of keenness because I wanted to put persons back at the heart of this, and the way to do that is by listening to them and listening to their needs. The report was drawn up on the basis of the UN Convention on Persons with Disabilities. It was based on that strategy, but it's too early for us to have an impact study of what the Commission's strategy has achieved. But I'd like to thank you and congratulate certain member states for their commitment in de-institutionalising persons with disabilities. I was speaking for 2 minutes with sign language, so I'll keep it very brief with my remaining time. We need to go further. We need to call for real anti-discrimination legislation in the EU. There is a directive, but it's been stymied in the Council for 4 years, since 2018. Nothing's happened then, because, of course, people have always got better things to do than help the most vulnerable. If you're not going to help us, we'll have to shout louder, we'll have to change our approach and ask the Commission to update the Equal Treatment Directive, since the Council's not interested in moving forward with its legislation. Because international sign language should also be put into place, as well as language which is easier to understand when it comes to European legislation, because persons with disabilities need to have access to political life. If they don't, we have to start helping them at this end in the European Parliament. What else can I say? Put an end to forced sterilisation. Stop institutionalising. Stop financing these institutions. A person with disabilities need to be able to decide for themselves where they'll live and what kind of support they want to receive. And when we talk about support, it's important that the EU also sets up community assistance so that any person with a disability isn't left alone, left behind. That children with disabilities can have transport to take them to school. And I'd like to thank one of the people who's in the chamber today, because anybody with a disability needs to be able to benefit from the possibility of having a job, either here, in the Commission, in another institution. How many persons with disabilities, visible or invisible, are employed? People spend their lives caring for persons with disabilities as well. What about them? Let's help them, let's support them too. It's vital that we think about a triangular policy which deals with persons with disabilities, but also the carers, as well as those who educate persons with disabilities. Odile Morin hasn't had access to justice. People like her as well, their people's fundamental rights are trampled upon and flouted every day.
Ma ei saanud rääkida kõike, mida ma tahtsin.
In the way that persons with disabilities, or some of them, say it, and I'm proud that I said it like that. I think that it'll be good to listen to what colleagues and the Commission have to say about my report, and I'd also like to thank Céline Goussier, who is here, who has spent 10 years talking about the ill treatment of children with disabilities in medical and other institutions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rapporteur. Next, on behalf of the Employment and Social Affairs Committee, Jordi Cañas has the floor. Thank you, President. The title of this report is Towards Equal Rights for Persons with Disabilities, and it's an honest title because towards is a preposition and it indicates movement towards a place in relation to an objective, and we have an objective which is equality, but we're not there yet. Sometimes we're there de jure but not de facto. We don't have that equality in reality, and we've seen that here today. We don't really have that equality. And equality is an objective that we have always been pursuing for everybody. But when it comes to persons with disabilities, they have a particular need for greater equality, and we as MEPs have an obligation. This Parliament needs to make a commitment to a clear ideal. All rights for all citizens in all countries of the European Union, so that what we have de jure is also available de facto in every country. We can't have exceptions when it comes to this search for equality, because equality is something that defines us as Europeans. And I hope that one day we will stop moving towards equality and really become an equal society for all. Thank you.
Herzlichen Dank, Herr Abgeordneter. Und nun für
Thank you. On behalf of the Petitions Committee, Ulrike Müller, please.
Präsidentin, Frau Kommissarin, geschätzte
Madam President, Commissioner, colleagues, the goal of all of us must be an inclusive, attentive society for all people. Persons with disabilities are entitled to shape their lives as they wish, and that includes living out relationships and acceptance and inclusiveness. That must be our common goal for all of us. Freedom is important. Even in European institutions, we haven't yet achieved that, as we've just seen. That's not acceptable and should be the first step that we take. In day-to-day life, we are all required to show more attention in society as a whole. In COVID, panic attacks and depression were on the rise, alongside physical and mental disabilities. There could be further exacerbation of those conditions, and that wasn't perceived clearly enough. To deal with that, we need to think differently, and we need to approach things differently, beginning at a European level right down into the municipal and local administrations. Persons with disabilities need greater support at all levels in Europe. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Frau Abgeordnete, und nun ersuche ich unsere Kommissarin Helena.
Thank you. I'd like to ask the Commissioner Helena Dalli to take the floor, please.
Thank you, Madam President, honourable members. The strategy on the rights of persons with disabilities focuses on areas where EU action brings the highest added value, strongly calling on member states to act in their areas of competence. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is our beacon. The Convention is clear. Equal rights need to underpin every single area of life of persons with disabilities. I welcome our common perspectives and commitment. This is the message we will send to the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in the context of its ongoing review of the EU's implementation of the Convention. The questions the Parliament raises with this report are fundamental. I welcome the opinions provided by EMPL, PETI and CULT committees. Living independently while included in the community is the cornerstone of equal participation and of full enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms. Next year, the Commission will present guidance on deinstitutionalisation and independent living, followed in 2024 by a framework of excellence for social services for persons with disabilities. These two initiatives go hand in hand, as true inclusion in the community can only happen if local quality services are available, affordable and accessible. Accessibility is another key element, as we heard earlier today, for independent living, as it enables persons with disabilities to move freely, access information and to enjoy the opportunities their communities offer, including in employment, in education, in culture, in sport and leisure, without forgetting, of course, access to healthcare. In this spirit, with the initiative Accessible EU, the Commission will offer support to Member States to implement accessibility legislation and to share and develop good practices. Another important initiative mentioned in your report is the European Disability Card. The Commission work programme for next year refers to our intention to put forward a legislative proposal. An impact assessment will help determine the scope of the card as well as the type of the legal instrument to put it into practice. We have high ambitions, but will need to be mindful of competences as set out in our treaties. The Commission intends to make progress on the Equal Treatment Directive beyond employment. I am glad to note that Parliament is on the same page in this respect. Both reasonable accommodation and non-discriminatory access are necessary to achieve equal treatment of persons with disabilities. Similarly, I hope we can continue to support and facilitate the participation of persons with disabilities in the upcoming European elections in 2024 in order to advance on the accessibility of electoral information and voting mechanisms, as well as on the participation of persons with disabilities. Additionally, persons with disabilities have a right to be elected on an equal basis with others, and this Parliament should represent the EU in all its diversity. Although bound by Member States' competences in the organisation of elections, I believe we can launch a strong message as EU institutions on this democratic matter. Political participation is, however, just part of the wider picture to ensure that broader legal rights in terms of legal capacity, decision-making, access to justice are ensured for persons with disabilities. The participation of persons with disabilities in the design and implementation of programmes for disaster risk reduction needs to be strengthened to make preparedness plans and response efforts more accessible. It is clear that much work remains to be done. Thank you for the opportunity to open this important point, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Herzlichen Dank, Frau Kommissarin.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. That brings us on to the spokespeople for the political group. Firstly, on behalf of the EPP, Sarah Skyttedal.
Thank you, Mrs. Speaker. And let me first start by thanking our rapporteur, Mrs. Pelletier, for her good work and for the good cooperation on this file. Let me highlight two important issues covered. Firstly, the forthcoming proposal on the EU disability card. It would mean more free movement between member states, also for EU citizens who are disabled. I think the Parliament needs to send an important signal in this report when we support the work of the European Commission in this matter. Secondly, the EU has great influence on our immediate neighbourhood. It is crucial that the EU uses its soft power to increase the quality of life for people with disabilities also outside our union. I'm happy that this perspective has also been covered and highlighted in this report. Mrs. Speaker, lastly, I would like to highlight the EPP Group's opposition to paragraph 90 of this report that proposes an EU legal framework for inclusive enterprises. Our European companies are already working really hard to better include persons with disabilities in enterprises and in society at large. I think that we need to show them that we see these efforts without demanding new EU directives that will further put red tape on businesses in these tough times. Thank you very much.
Thank you. On behalf of the Social and Democrat Group, the next speaker is Theresa Mweik, please. Thank you very much, President. Commissioner, members, colleagues. Inclusion is a human right, and every person has the right to have equal rights as a member of society. Those words are in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities of the UN, and it also looks at how human rights should be implemented in different areas of life for persons with disabilities. And 10 years ago, we committed to this, and we've heard once again today that the realities are very different. And this is something we should be ashamed of. Persons with disabilities are often categorically excluded. Sometimes participation is not made possible, and the human right to inclusion is constantly violated. And we still don't have a directive which prevents this kind of discrimination, and we still don't have a proper ability to get to grips with the kind of violence which this implies. Persons with disabilities are subject to barriers that we impose as a society, so we need a paradigm shift. We need a different way of dealing with this issue. We need different rules, different laws. We must ensure that self-determination is possible and protect people from discrimination. Persons with disability should not depend on benevolence and donations. What they need is that their human rights are upheld. And this is what we should be concerned with. Ms. Pelletier's report and the way in which it has been presented has demonstrated very well. We support it and we encourage everybody to get to grips with this issue. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Als nächstes für die...
Thank you. On behalf of Renew, Ms. Abir Al-Sahani has the floor.
Tack, fru ordförande, fru kommissionär, ärade kollegor.
Thank you, Madam President, Commissioner, colleagues. The EU's motto is united in diversity, but we shouldn't simply have that between the nations that make up the EU, but within member states as well. Certain citizens, because they're persons with disabilities, are disadvantaged by the states in which they live. Their fundamental rights are not respected. Their right to vote, for example. And that's because it's difficult for them to have access to voting booths and polling stations in their constituencies for local elections and other elections, simply because they're people or persons with disabilities. Various member states don't respect the rights of persons with disabilities, and their rights are not guaranteed. The Commission has been trying to do something about this, and what we need to do now is make certain that persons with disabilities do enjoy full access to all services that they're supposed to. We can't keep dragging our feet about this. Most member states which are unable to guarantee all citizens the rights which they ought to enjoy, they should know that we are looking at them, we're keeping an eye on them, because it's vitally important that this situation be brought to an end. Let me thank Anne-Sophie Pelletier for the work that she's done, and all the groups from left to right who have worked together on this deserve thanks as well. Despite our ideological differences, we've still managed to come up with a good text, decent proposals to make sure that persons with disabilities are treated with the respect that they deserve. They are citizens with full rights and they should enjoy them.
Thank you. Ms. Katrin Langenzipen on behalf of the Greens, please.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear Helena, dear Madam Chair, colleagues, thank you for that well-written report on equal rights of persons with disabilities. A famous activist in Germany, he's a wheelchair user, said in a statement, "Disabled persons are the last to be mentioned and the first to be forgotten." The situation for disabled persons in the EU is still unjust, and almost all member states ignoring the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. They have ratified it in different ways, here and there. Our role is to push EU legislation so that member states finally implement our rights. The freedom of movement for persons with disabilities must be guaranteed. This is why we urgently need an EU disability card. Here I still have a German one. I can't use it as an EU citizen in France or in Belgium when I take the bus to the parliament. But the transport must be accessible. Otherwise, the card is useless for me and for us persons with disabilities. We also need equal opportunities for persons with disabilities in the labour market. Stop funding institutions. Therefore, here we call as well the Commission to review the Employment Equality Directive to align it with the CRPD and push inclusive employment. I have many things to add, but let me say something. Christmas is knocking on our door, and there are so many TV shows in our member states. They are doing something good for us, spending money, millions and millions. Can we stop that business, please? We want to have human rights, equal rights, and no charity. Thank you.
Herzlichen Dank, Frau Abgeordnete.
Thank you very much. The next person to speak the floor for the ID group will be Antonio Rinaldi.
Presidente, colleghi, parlerò...
President, colleagues, as a father of a child with 100% disability, I shall speak, not as a member of the Parliament. I read the report on Towards Equal Rights for Persons with Disabilities, and I wonder why all the European institutions didn't pay attention to the day-to-day problems faced by persons with disabilities and their families that they have to take on themselves. The marginalisation and the impediments, above all in the workplace, and the red tape and the difference in health treatment and economic support within member states are all ignored when full attention for persons with disabilities should be the measure of an organised democratic society. So now, ladies and gentlemen, I will talk as a member of the Parliament, and I cannot fail to notice that this report brings in other categories of citizens who need high levels of protection. I don't deny that, but I don't know if they're comparable to persons with disabilities. Why can persons with disabilities not get their own autonomous report? Why do we have to put in categories which have nothing to do with the world and requirements of persons with disabilities when there are 87 million persons with disabilities in the EU, 24 million of them with very serious ones, and children as well? These need a great deal of protection, and I'd like to thank Roberto Metsola, our president, for wearing this Parliament badge. I'm one of those who can wear the badge, head held high. Thank you.
Als nächstes zu Wort gemeldet für die ECR.
The next person to take the floor for the ECR group will be Beata Mazurek.
Pani Przewodnicząca, Szanowni Państwo.
President, colleagues. We need to think about the interests of persons with disabilities. It's an issue I've been interested in for a very long time, and this is why I agree with everything that has been set out in this report. We really need to address discrimination against persons with disabilities. They must be included in society, and I think that's a priority for us all. We must do everything that we can to ensure that those persons understand that they are a part of our community. I emphasise the need for an action plan to ensure that persons with disabilities are not, for example, faced with finding difficulties accessing food. In the report, there are a number of issues picked up on which are not directly linked to this matter. That includes, for example, the situation regarding minorities and LGBT persons. I'm not sure why those issues are being raised in a document which is supposed to be about equal treatment for persons with disabilities. It seems to me to be an attempt to manipulate the issue, and I cannot go along with it. Thank you.
Schön, als nächstes für die Fraktion.
Thank you. On behalf of the left, the next speaker will be José Guzmão.
Obrigado, Sra. Presidente.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Commissioner. The fact is that throughout Europe, member states who have signed up to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and subscribe to the idea that persons with disabilities should enjoy an independent, autonomous life are simply signing up to stuff they've got no intention of delivering on. There's all sorts of exclusion, there's all sorts of fake therapies and all kinds of problems and barriers put in the way of persons with disabilities. And part of the responsibility for this is mainly lying with the member states. But it's also true that we continue to channel a considerable amount of community funding to policies on persons with disabilities and channel it to institutions which run counter to the spirit and the letter of this report. And this financing needs to stop. All the money spent on these policies need to be spent on granting persons with disabilities an independent life, and that's our responsibility.
Thank you. And the next to ask the floor is Miroslav Kolakuzic. Thank you.
Poštovane kolege. Ladies and gentlemen, citizens of the EU, family, the society, the EU have one purpose and sense only, and that is to take care of one another, so that those who can give more, and those who can't can still have
joilla ei ole, pystyvät kuitenkin elämään.
Disabilities, unfortunately, can be found in different groups. Some have a lesser degree of disability and can, with a slight help, participate in the society fully. But some persons with disability are born in such a way that physically and mentally, from the moment they are born, they just cannot participate in the society. Many children who are born or acquire or become autistic at early age are not those persons with slight difficulties. Some of them are fully incapable of living alone and need the care of their parents 24 hours a day. And their parents only have one worry, and this is what is going to happen to them when they die. This is what we need to bear in mind. Thank you.
Als nächstes zu Wort gemeldet.
Thank you. The next speaker is Stelios Kimporopoulos. Go ahead.
Dear Madam President, dear Commissioner Dalli, dear colleagues, we speak about equal rights for disabled persons. Yet, this is the very first time that after my election, I speak in front of you from this rostrum like everyone else in this house. My excitement is so emotionally great, even if you see such small change. The fact that the place of every disabled person in their society is not equal to the other citizen is obvious in so many ways. This is the reason I welcome this report, particularly the highlighting of the urge to grant the right to legal capacity to every person, the adoption of common terms for independent living and institutionalization across the EU, whose lack causes a continuous misinterpretation of the USCRPD and the misplacement of funding, the collection of common statistical data, the importance of accessible housing, and the statement that involving disabled persons to political decision-making is not enough unless it is promoted to co-production. By insisting on these issues, the EU would support the implementation of the already existing guidelines towards equal rights, although we have to go through a long distance. In Greek, we have a word which is philanthropia, is equal to charity. We don't want to be philanthropy in order to accept that every person is unique, and in order to have an inclusive society, we want this individualism. Thank you very much.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you. All members, without exception, are entitled to come to this lectern and give their speech. So I can only apologise on behalf of the House that it has only been possible from now. It should, of course, be taken for granted. Maria Grappini, the next speaker. Madam President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, I too am moved now, speaking after our colleague, speaking about persons with disabilities. We have studies, we've had research done, we've looked at the impact in society, we've looked at how these people are affected, we've got the UN Convention, but in every country the first problem such people face is accessibility. Even in European Parliament, colleagues don't have access to the room. How can that be? A colleague has spoken for the first time to Parliament from here. Madam Commissioner, I believe we must bring an end to this. Colleagues, we must all bring an end to this council dictatorship. For 14 years, there's been an attempt to get legislation for persons with disabilities. 14 years. And for 11 years there's been deadlock from 2 countries. Well, here we are in Strasbourg. For persons with disabilities, it's impossible for them to get through passport queues entering Schengen. And I think in Parliament we must unite around this, and we must ensure that here we ensure that what we preach is put in practice without hard and fast measures. What we put in legislation isn't put in practice by Council, and this will never be helpful for people with disabilities. Thank you. Thank you. Monica Semedo is our next speaker. Go ahead.
1.5 years ago, I suddenly became impaired. I have a rare disease, and today I only see 25%, even with the glasses, which is sometimes disturbing. But I know, and I'm aware, that many others have more struggle. Many others are in a worse situation than me. They face discrimination in their everyday life. Half of people with disabilities are unemployed. Nearly 30% are at risk of poverty. And they are excluded, we are excluded from society. We have barriers, for example, in transportation or in education. 800,000 people with a disability could not vote in 2019 for the European elections because of barriers of accessibility. That cannot be. They have their right to vote. They have their voice to vote. As one of the chairs of the European Parliament's cross-party disability intergroup, I can assure you, we fight for equal chances and opportunities for everybody, means also for people with disabilities. And we fight that everybody can contribute to the society, because we can and we want to. Thank you.
Herzlichen Dank. Ich muss jetzt leider streng sein.
Thank you. Unfortunately, you have to be strict. These are wonderful speeches, full of passion, all of them. But nevertheless, I must implore that you all adhere to speaking time. It's always particularly unfair when I say that just ahead of the next speaker, when the person before overstepped their time. But nevertheless, Grace O'Sullivan, can I ask you to stick to your speaking time, please?
Rights, not charity. This is the slogan of the Clare Leader Forum, an inspiring group in my own constituency who campaigned tirelessly to overhaul the outdated bureaucracy faced by people with disabilities. Any Irish person living with a disability, intellectual or physical, knows the daily struggle to secure services that are considered basic in many parts of Europe. I recall the campaigner Trish McNamara saying to me that as soon as she was in a wheelchair, it was like she turned invisible. Still today, people are forced into nursing homes for lack of alternative, suitable accommodation. At Onakara Centre in Middleton, Cork, the voices of the vulnerable residents and service users have all but been ignored. I myself am battling to get my own daughter the assistance she needs against a system that just does not want to know. Ireland has signed up to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It is time to put it into place.
Herzlichen Dank, Frau Abgeordnete Rosanna.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Rosanna Conte. Please come to the lectern.
Grazie. Di recente stiamo assistendo.
Thank you, Madam President. We've recently all seen how awareness of the issue of persons with disability is increasingly widespread, as shown by the ever-growing number of legislative proposals and institutional debates. But that's not enough, and we need to be quite clear about this. There are too many barriers which stop persons with disabilities from participating actively in our society, starting with education at school, where there's still limits of inclusion, right as far as jobs, where prejudice often wins out over ability. If we add to this that in many member states there's still no legal or monetary recognition for caregivers who assist persons with disabilities, we can understand that there's still too many gaps in the legislation. So what we need is a practical, but also not just a practical change, but a mindset change as well, which would allow persons with disabilities to feel that they're in charge and not just recipients of state handouts, and would allow each and every one of us to feel that we live in a society where everyone enjoys full access to the benefits of inclusion. Thank you.
Als nächstes zu Wort gemeldet ist der Abgeordnete.
Thank you. Adam Kozsa, next speaker.
Önök jól tudják, hogy mindig is kiálltam a fogyatékossággal élők.
As you know, I've always stood up for the rights of persons with disabilities. However, it's not useful to put other ideological issues in the text which could distract attention. Instead of having ideological debates, we need to try to find solutions so that we can do more with innovative technologies. That would help persons with disabilities to be able to live independent lives. When it comes to education and training, we need to remove barriers. We need to put in place programs which make it possible for persons with disabilities to take up high-quality employment and to get the same pay for the same job. Our policies will only be credible if we use words clearly. The report on persons with disabilities should be about those issues and not other matters.
Herzlichen Dank. Als nächste zu Wort gemeldet ist die Frau Abgeordnete.
Thank you. Rosa Estaras Ferragut is next.
Presidenta.
Thanks, Madam President. The UN Convention on Persons with Disability is the first human rights treaty that the EU signed up to, along with all of its member states, and is legally binding. But 16 years on, we can look at the implementation. Some progress has been made, but there's an awful lot of work still to do. The key words are accessibility and inclusion. Inclusion means that all persons have the same value. It means tolerance. It means equality. It means respect. Persons with disabilities are giving us a lesson in what those words ought to mean. Accessibility is the other key word. Accessibility for education. There's an awful lot of stuff still to be done there. Accessibility for jobs. Just look at the figures. Persons with disabilities have got much higher unemployment rates than those who do not. In terms of health, in terms of justice, gender-based violence, accessible housing, participation, the right to vote, and in particular stereotypes. Persons with disabilities are giving us lessons every day. We've got a chance now to do something and to act in the same way in which they have to handle their everyday lives. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Abgeordnete. Als nächstes zu Wort.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Marc Angel. Thank you, Madam President, Commissioner, everybody. Numerous reports have been adopted for persons with disabilities in this chamber, whether it's a harmonised definition of persons with disabilities or quotas in businesses for greater inclusion or better social coverage for persons with disabilities. We unanimously in the European Parliament are calling for tangible action to put an end to the social injustice suffered by persons with disabilities. It's unacceptable that none of our appeals or promises have fed into hard and fast action. I turn to the Commission. Let's work hand in hand to ensure that this proposal for legislation establishing a European disabilities card be adopted under this parliamentary term, a multi-purpose card, not just linked to transport advantages, but also linked into culture, leisure, sport, education and employment, an inclusive card that takes into account the kind of disabilities with pictograms and QR codes that are different, facilitating thereby contact for persons with disabilities that aren't always visible and their access to first-line services. It will be added credibility for us facing our voters. Thank you, Mrs. Pelletier, for an excellent report. I put my trust in the Commission that this will advance quickly, jointly with us. President, thank you very much. The next speaker is Salvatore De Meo.
Thanks, Madam President. Once again today in this chamber, we all agree that disability is a condition which puts people at a disadvantage and makes their everyday life and social inclusion more difficult. But for years now, despite various national and European initiatives, we have to say that there's still a great deal still to be done. And we need to note in particular that we need to deal with the cultural barriers and indifference to discrimination. I think that discrimination can be seen by those who want to see it, but it's very difficult to get over barriers like that, barriers in people's minds. This resolution goes in the right direction and puts forward active policies to make sure that people's autonomy is respected and allows us to move into a phase where we pay more attention to persons with disabilities, for them and also those who live with them and care for them, and they are aware of the fact that they're not enjoying their full rights as they ought to. Thank you.
Thank you. Sirpa Pitikainen is the next speaker.
Arvoisat kuulijat, vammaiset.
Dear listeners, people with disabilities are people, and that is why they should enjoy human rights. Human rights are part of the rule of law principle, which is one of the tasks of the European Commission. So I hope that the Commission can really step up their activities and test the limits of their mandate towards the Council, which has blocked the Accessibility Directive and has lessened its level of ambition. I would like to thank the Commission for its promise to introduce the EU Disability Card. I think that is the first step in implementing actual mobility for people with disabilities. We need similar duties for interoperability as are now being talked of in mobility. Deinstitutionalization, same opportunities, same rights in working life, and that is why it is very important to force companies towards diversifying their workforce. Wages is another important matter, and language rights are important too, and that covers this House, the European Parliament, and interpretation as well. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Damit kommen wir.
Thank you. That takes us to the Catch the Eye procedure for the members who've asked for the floor. Milan Abriglis is the starting one.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the floor. Whenever we're discussing these issues, we have to say that the EU is a contracting party to the EU Convention. So legally and politically speaking, we need to be aware, we need to respect the highest standards. And the message that we're adopting today, after last week, we need to use it in this respect. We need to use EU funds to make sure that people with disabilities can live in a more independent way. But they need to have access to quality support and care. And secondly, mobility needs to be more equal. And I'm proud that Slovenia is one of the forerunners on the EU card for people with disabilities front. The Commission should also make sure that the rights of the disabled people are equally recognized throughout the European Union, because we all are a party to the Convention. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Als nächstes,
Thank you. The next speaker is Sandra Pereira.
Thanks, Madam President. This report puts together many of the demands that persons with disabilities want to make. We need to make certain that we also help fight for their rights, so that anyone, no matter what their social origin or level of income or where they live, has access to quality public services and can defend their own rights to health, to housing, to education and other rights. including the right to communication. We need policies which put persons with disabilities at the heart of the legislation, that make certain that they can be citizens enjoying full rights throughout their lives and can have a dignified, autonomous life with access to inclusive, public, high-quality education, as well as health care tailored to their needs, as well as access to things like sport. It's important also that the organisations that they have and their families are also protected. When we are looking at these problems and attempts to overcome the various kinds of discrimination, it's important that all their rights are respected. Thanks very much.
Dankeschön. Unser nächster Sprecher ist der Herr Abgeordnete.
Thank you. Radan Kanev is the next speaker.
Благодаря, госпожо председател.
Thank you, President. For us who participate in this debate, it is quite clear that the integration of people with disabilities, the situation of these people is very different in the different member states. Their participation in the labour market, their income, their participation in public life, and their representation in national parliaments, or here, even here in the European Parliament, the situations are very different, and we cannot explain these differences by means of the financial situations in our countries. The biggest problem is how to spend the money allocated for the integration for people of disabilities. And the focus we have to put on our action is the ban on spending money for integration for other purposes and further isolating the people with disabilities. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Als nächstes zu Wort gemeldet.
Thank you. Clara Aguilera is the next speaker.
Muchas gracias, Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. I would like to add my voice to those supporting this important initiative, and of course I congratulate Ms. Pelletier on her report. I would also like to ask, as others have done, for us to update the Directive on Equal Treatment. This directive is not preventing the kind of discrimination against persons with disabilities that we're seeing, and it's incredible. We have the welfare state in Europe. We have a Europe based on rights that we're so proud of, and yet persons with disabilities don't have these rights. Sometimes they can't even vote, as we have seen. It's absolutely unacceptable in the European Union. The right to take decisions is very important. Accessibility should be a priority objective, a priority for all of us. The European Union has not lived up to the needs of the circumstances, and it should be on the agenda, top of the agenda, both for the Commission and for the Council, which is not even present in the Parliament today. And I just wanted to close by saying that, as my colleague has said, persons with disabilities don't want handouts, they want rights, and our policy should be to change things to improve the rights of persons with disabilities. Let's do it now. Thank you.
Als nächstes zu Wort gemeldet ist die Frau Abgeordnete.
Thank you. Mrs. Fofana is the next speaker.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Les personnes en...
Thank you, Madam President. Persons with disabilities are faced with structural obstacles and discrimination, are often victims of violence. When it comes to gender-based violence, we can bring in tailored measures for, say, women with disabilities who are from minorities which are the most seriously affected, but unfortunately they are often faced with double discrimination. They suffer from violence, but often excluded from basic services like health, jobs, education, etc. There's also invisible disabilities, which are still a huge problem for the individual who has them. It's important that we avoid creating an environment which promotes violence and injustice. We need to recognise the intersection of gender and disability which persons are subject to, if so as to have more targeted and tailored responses. We need to increase the legal aspects which will guarantee comfortable access to their rights for persons with disabilities, as well as access to justice. There's going to be a day of protest for the denial of rights to persons with disabilities. We need to give them a voice, which should be a huge priority for us. Thank you very much.
Als nächstes zu Wort gemeldet ist der
Thank you. Libe Committee Chair Juan Fernando Aguilar is the next speaker to have asked for the floor.
Señora Presidenta, Comisaria Dalli,
Dali, when we talk about equality of rights for persons with disability, we're talking about fundamental rights and the Charter that protects them. There is Article 21, which prohibits all forms of discrimination, and Article 26, which requires the EU to promote these issues and to integrate persons with disabilities. This is what this report from the Libe Committee is about, which has Ms. Belletti as its rapporteur. We need to address these issues, looking beyond national differences when it comes to discrimination against persons with disabilities. Political participation, access to healthcare, the prohibition of any kind of violence or forced practices against persons with disabilities. These things are so important, and I think this shows that if we are looking at this issue, we're looking at people's rights as individuals. We're looking at how we can work for the good of society as a whole in Europe and for the member states. But this debate would not be complete if we did not make it clear that we're still waiting to see what comes of the Equal Treatment Directive. And it's been stuck in the Council for over 10 years. It's just unbelievable. And so I think this is an objective that the Commission should really pick up on. That Equal Treatment Directive is needed to add to the work that we're doing in the European Parliament to address discrimination against persons with disabilities. Thank you, President.
Vielen Dank, Herr Abgeordneter. Und den Abschluss der
Thank you. And to conclude the Catch the Eye, Mick Wallace, please.
The right to timely access to affordable, preventative and curative health care of good quality is enshrined in the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The EU and all its member states have ratified this convention. Yet, in Ireland last week, the Health Service Executive were forced to apologise to the families of children across the country who cannot access disability services. Earlier this year, Inclusion Ireland conducted a survey among families with children with disabilities. Over 50% of the families of children surveyed were not in receipt of any disability service. Over 85% of them have waited for over a year. How, in God's name, can the Irish government stand over this? And is there any way that the EU can actually pressure the Irish government to do the right thing in the area of disabilities? Thank you very much.
Der Dank geht zurück. Damit ist die Rednerinnenliste.
Thank you. Back to you. That concludes the speakers list, and I will now ask the Commissioner to come and give us her concluding remarks. Thank you.
Rights are non-negotiable. So the strategy for the rights of persons with disabilities is anchored in all the rights of the UN Convention. Recognizing persons with disabilities as rights owners is the entry point to a change of perspective in disability policies. Persons with disabilities are citizens entitled to, like everybody else, to take their decisions, have ambition, develop their talents, and flourish in their private, educational and professional lives. We listened carefully to you while setting the priorities in the strategy, as you know, and we expect continued cooperation with you, the House of European Democracy, as the strategy becomes a practical reality. All three institutions must take seriously the implementation of the strategy for the rights of persons with disabilities and discuss ways to address and to better our practices in that regard. I value all opportunities, including today's debate, to develop our work. Together, we can progress towards building a union of equality. I thank you.
Herzlichen Dank, Frau Kommissarin. Und damit erhält die Berichterstatterin Anne-Sophie Pelletier nochmals das Wort. Bitte.
Thank you very much. Now to the rapporteur, Mrs. Pelletier.
Madame Dalli.
Madame Dalli, I think you can see that this Parliament is really calling upon you to get things started, get the ball rolling, and we want a directive on the European card, and we want it before the end of this term to make sure that we at least achieve this equality within this term. Time for words of thanks. I'd like to thank all my colleagues, the shadow rapporteurs, of course. I would also like to thank my colleagues from the Petty Committee, the Employment Committee, the Cult Committee. Thank you very much to all my colleagues who really have contributed with loads of opinions and a lot of, really good comments that were so important to feed into the debate. Now, this report, I came here in 2019, and right from the outset, I said to myself, right, I'm going to take a report on persons with disabilities, because before coming here, I was actually dealing with people with disabilities, so it was my ambition. And I think we're all different. Of course, we're all unique. And at the end of the day, it's difference that gives rise to difference and society and being together. So it's very important for us here in Parliament to make our voices heard, a strong voice, to guarantee real, genuine equality, fundamental equality for all persons living with a disability. And therefore, Madame Dalli, once again, I turn to you. Be ambitious. We should never, never have inequality between citizens in this European Union. There is such a thing as ableism, I'm afraid, and we've noticed that this has an impact, that this really has an impact on people with disabilities, and all too often, we just let them speak up for themselves, the voice of the forgotten. Here in this Parliament, we want to make sure that these voices of people living with disabilities are heard, that we hear these voices, that they are not forgotten, that people living with a disability are always on our minds. Thank you.
Herzlichen Dank, Frau Berichterstatterin. Die Aussprache ist.
Thank you very much to the rapporteur. This concludes our debate on this item. The vote will be tomorrow. This brings us to the next item on this agenda. That is the Commission statement on the outcome of COP27. So for this, we'll have the Executive Vice President, Frans Timmermans. We'd like to welcome him and ask him to come forward to the podium for his introductory remarks. So welcome to the plenary, sir. Time to get to work.
Honourable members, if we want to evaluate COP27, I think we need to start a bit before, a couple of months before, and see where we were internationally leading into COP27. I attended several meetings, including G20, where major emitters were trying to step back quite substantially from the agreements we had reached in Glasgow in COP26. So the months leading up to COP27 weren't very auspicious for the most ambitious amongst us. Secondly, a confrontation was growing between the developed world and the developing world on the issue of adaptation, but especially on loss and damage. So this combination of major emitters trying to step back from their commitments and an increasing confrontational attitude from developing countries because they felt not being heard by the developed world did not bode well for the preparation of COP27. Now, I think the results are a lot better than what I expected before, and I want to start by thanking both the Council and Parliament for playing a very active role on the spot, but especially in the preparation, because one of the myths that was created in the months ahead was that because of the war, Europe was stepping back from its commitment in the Green Deal, was digging up a lot of coal, and that all our commitments would be lost. And thanks to the very hard work of the co-legislators, explained very clearly that we're not just sticking to our commitments of reducing our emissions with at least 55% by 2030, but that we would overshoot that commitment already on the basis of the three pieces of legislation agreed between the co-legislators between Parliament and the Council. So we could take that thing at the beginning of the second week of COP, we could take that off the table and we could still show clearly that we remained ambitious. Now, in the days leading up to the end of the COP, tensions were high because of attempts to step away from the commitments in Glasgow, and also because of the proposal put on the table by G77 plus China on a fund for loss and damage, which would mirror earlier funds and which would not look at countries in terms of their role in emissions, but only whether in 1992 they were considered developing countries, yes or no. And I think at some point in close dialogue and cooperation with both the member states and the ministers present, who were all extremely active during the COP, and the delegation of the European Parliament, we came to the conclusion that Europe should try and bridge these differences by coming up with a plan, especially on loss and damage, that would not start from 1992, but from the situation now. So that would do a couple of things. That would address the responsibility of all those who are major emitters and all those who can afford to take responsibility. That would focus the loss and damage fund on the most vulnerable countries and not spread it out to all developing countries. And that would be able to use what we call the mosaic of measures from all other instruments, including, for instance, reforming the international financial institutions, putting the MDBs in a different position, etc., the private sector, engaging with the private sector, etc., etc. And I think when the European Union put this on the table, and I discussed it on behalf of the EU with the Secretary-General, with my colleagues from the US and China, especially the US and China were taken aback a bit that we were doing this. China thought that the G77 plus China plan was the one that would carry the day. The Americans thought that there would be no plan at all. So when we came up with this idea, I think we were able to create, as the Secretary-General of the UN put it, a new situation where we did not have a confrontation between the classical developing world and the developed world, but we would distinguish, especially on the basis of whether you're a major emitter or not, and look at those countries that needed support more than those who need it less. And I think this was an important breakthrough that allowed us to bring parties closer together. It also allowed us to insist on at least not stepping back from our commitments